unsustainable to feed 10 billion people the way that they probably want to be fed. And if we have a look at what's happening at the moment with the number of animals slaughtered globally to feed the planet, we started off around about 8 billion in 1961, taking us up to nearly 70 billion in 2018, and current estimates put that around the early 70 billion number of animals. So we've got almost an exponential growth in the number of animals being slaughtered, and those animals need to be fed and raised. If we have a look at the forecast meat consumption over the next decade by species, we can see that beef and veal will show quite significant growth in developing countries, as will pig meat, and particularly poultry, and a lot less so in sheep meat. But we can see that there's a projection through, this is only to 2028, in the amount of meat that's going to be needed to satisfy the consumer demand. And if we then look at how rising incomes and our growing middle class are affecting the demand for protein, we can see that besides Thailand, Asian countries are showing massive growth in their demand for protein. And that demand is going to continue to increase and is going to need to be satisfied. As we've said, that's unlikely to be able to be satisfied simply by cloning, for want of a better word, what we're currently doing with animal agriculture. That is unlikely to be able to provide enough protein in a sustainable way without clearing the entire surface of the planet, and we know that's not going to end well, in order to provide the protein that's going to be needed. If we then concentrate on Asia and what's going on there, let's look at a few population statistics. 4.7 billion people in Asia, 60% of the global population, 36% of whom consume low or no meat. So if you look at that in terms of if they want to aspire to the protein consumption that we see in developed countries, then that's a massive, massive increase. And population growth just makes the story even worse, as does our rising middle class. And this is particularly going to affect Asia. It's projected that by 2028, 56% of global meat imports will be imported by Asia. So what will drive the future of the demand for protein in Asia? I think this picture says it all. There are over 1.1 billion millennials in Asia, over 5 times the combined amount of millennials in US and Europe combined. So that has some massive implications. So add in Gen Z, and some 46% of Asia's population is comprised of people in those demographics. And unlike other parts of the world, millennials in Asia are earning more money than their parents. So it's their values that will drive the long-term future of protein in Asia. If we look at a recent survey of 9 Asian countries, their teens and young adults, what are their values? Well, 56% said they've been trying to eat less meat. 70% said they pay attention to food labels. 60% said they try to only eat foods with natural ingredients. And 67% said they closely watch what they eat. So you can see that these demographics have a great focus on what they eat, the food that they eat, where it comes from. So those values are what's going to drive the demand for protein in Asia. Now, there's many alternative protein options that can be used to satisfy this demand for protein. We have things like chickpea, konjac, lentil, millet, mung bean, even potatoes. And peas, rice, soy, sunflower, wheat, and even more, outside of the crops, we have biomass, mushrooms, and mycoprotein. And by biomass, I mean growing microorganisms like yeast or even bacteria, and then extracting the protein and then texturizing that to make alternative protein products. And a lot of these sources are already being used in Asia. For a few examples, Kirana in Singapore is using jackfruit, and they're making a pulled type product, pulled meat, pulled pork type product, which jackfruit lends itself to very well. We have Future Foods, they're using chickpea, more wheat, more meat, who are using mushrooms and soy, and MJ Plant-Based, who are using mushrooms. So there's already a range of alternative proteins coming to the fore in Asia to help satisfy this demand. So some people would ask, what about hybrid products? What about products that are hybrids of alternative proteins and, say, conventional meat? Are they the future? Why would people eat them? Well, they do satisfy some of the demands of the attributes or values that we looked at. So looking at their known ingredients, they help people eat less meat because they can substitute with an alternative protein with their conventional meat. And also, there's many, many types of hybrids that can help to do this. We've got conventional meat and plant-based products, plant-based and our biomass, cell-based and plant-based. Cell-based being where we take some cells from an animal and we actually grow meat in fermenters. And we'll come to that a little bit later on. But all of these products can satisfy some of the demands, some of the values, particularly of those millennials and Gen Zs in Asia. If we look at some of these cutting edge technologies, and these technologies also address some of the issues that we've talked about in arable land and fresh water. So Solar Foods is a company based in Finland, and they say they make food from air, protein from air. And what they do is take water, split into hydrogen and oxygen, add some carbon and some minerals, and they grow microorganisms, which they then extract those organisms, and they make textured protein from that. So they can make alternative protein products. If we look at a company called Arbion, they actually make food from wood. Now, when you think about it, when we cut down a tree that we want to use for lumber, what happens to all the branches? On many occasions, they simply get burned. And that certainly does not do any favours to the planet with greenhouse gas emissions and pollution generally. So if we take those products and turn them into food, that's great. But then what happens to that log? We turn that round log into square or rectangular lumber. What happens to all the sawdust and other offcuts? Well, that also just gets disposed of or burned. So this technology is able to take that wood, break down the cellulose into components that the microorganisms can use to grow, and then turn that into protein for food. And again, you can see that uses a waste product. So the use of the water and the use of the land has already been taken care of, and you don't need a lot of land for the processing of the technology to actually turn it into food. If we then go back to our plant-based proteins and the other ones that we looked at and say, well, how do they fit into Asia? How do they fit the Asian situation? Well, we've got some examples, some country-specific opportunities. In China, for instance, they're a major soy and pea protein exporter. So they could then turn those crops inwards to make alternative proteins if the consumers demand these products. Millet and lentils, they're also good for many parts of China because they're very water efficient and they're suitable for low water zones. And as we all know, with climate change, some areas are becoming drier. So some areas, they may lose the ability to grow some crops, but millet and lentil may lend themselves to replacing those products or maximising the output from that arable land. If we look to Vietnam, for instance, konjac is an option for intercropping on rubber plantations, making the most again of the arable land that we've got. Jackfruit is an option for expansion. As we've seen before, Karana can turn jackfruit into a very good pulled meat mimic product. And peas for restoring degraded land, putting nitrogen back into the soil, nitrogen fixation, and the plant base can also be used as a green manure. So again, looking at this sustainable cycle approach to food rather than the linear approach where we make it, we eat it, we dispose of the residue, and we just keep doing that on and on and on. In Singapore, we can use mycoprotein, which is where we basically grow fungi, and then we use that to make alternative protein products. Corn, Q-U-O-R-N, the product out of the UK, is already doing that and have been doing that for decades. But there are now other companies coming up with the technology to supply mycoprotein. And one of the advantages for Singapore is that not only does it have a healthy nutritional profile, but it's resource efficient, and it can be grown indoors and vertically. So again, does not need arable land. I don't think we're going to see too much grazing of cattle in Singapore. So they need some alternative technologies that are going to enable them to become more self-sufficient under their 30 by 2030 plan. And lion's mane mushroom is another product that could be grown without arable land, and that has a naturally meat-like texture, so therefore it's quite suitable for making these alternative protein products. One thing though we do need to realise is that Asia comprises many markets. You can't sell in the Middle East what you can sell in India, what you can sell in Thailand, what you can sell in China. There may be some overlap, but you need to be more specific in what you do. If we look to China, plant-based meats, they're increasingly on trend, backed by celebrity endorsements. Again, our Gen Zs and millennials driving this, looking at health and sustainability. Whereas if we look to Thailand, the situation's a little different. They're primarily looking for plant-based meat products that offer an optimal balance of taste, price, nutrition, and convenience. So companies, when they're entering markets in Asia, can't just simply import what sells well in California or what sells well in London or Berlin and expect that it's simply going to sell well in the Asia markets. It's not that simple. Localization is the key. So if there's a demand for these products, what about manufacturing capacity? Because if you've got consumer demand, you need to be able to satisfy that demand. One of the worst things you can do in marketing is create a demand for a product that you can't supply. So what's actually happening recently in Asia? Well, we've seen Nestle Malaysia have opened a specialized plant-based facility. Now, as we know, Nestle, the largest food company on the planet, they are pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into alternative protein strategies in Asia. So that's a good signal of the future of what's likely to happen. Hey Meat, which is a local Chinese startup, is bringing some of the new technologies in extrusion, high moisture extrusion technology into its production this year. And that particular technology gives you that stringy, fibrous texture that you need to make convincing meat mimics. Beyond Meat has opened a manufacturing facility in Jiaxing. So again, adding major capacity to producing products in Asia. and they are focusing on pork, which, as we know, is the largest species consumed in China. And so that shows again that they are localizing some of that production. If we look at some examples of product introductions to see what's happening in the marketplace, let's look at Hong Kong. We have Omni Meat, and they are making pork mince, luncheon meat, buns, and more of those products in Singapore, Thailand, mainland China, and Taiwan. And of course, luncheon meat is interesting. It's a local product, something that the local people are familiar with and know how to use. And they've just recently introduced fish products as well, including fillets, burgers, crab cakes, and shelf-stable salmon and tuna. Again, interesting that they're introducing shelf-stable products, which addresses some of the issues with refrigeration in some parts of Asia. On the retail side, Marks and Spencer, they're expanding their vegan plant kitchen range in Hong Kong as well. So retailers are also getting on board. If we look now at China, we've got Ziru doing pork mince. We have Zhen Meat, who are doing beef, pork, and crayfish. Again, look at that China, pork, crayfish, local introductions for local tastes. And Starfield, chicken, pork, and beef, a very successful startup, now starting to mainstream their products in the China market. If we now look to India, we have Good Dot. They're doing mutton bites, chicken-free chunks, plant-based ready meals, all tailored for Indian tastes, and they are shelf-stable. Again, when you're looking at Asia, a country like India only has 30% of the population have access to refrigeration. So being shelf-stable is a very good selling point. Good Dot are now looking to expand into other countries in Europe and the US as well. It'll be very interesting to see how a company like that out of India can challenge some of the more established companies in their own home markets. In Thailand, we have CP Foods with their Meat Zero products. In retail, they've got pork mince, chicken, nuggets, and crispy pork. Again, products that are targeted to local consumers. In the QSR, they're releasing chicken products. We also have Thai Union, one of the largest seafood companies in the world, crab cakes, dim sum. Let's Plant Meat, a local Thai startup, doing patties and mince. So we've got a range of people coming into the market, but I think it's highly significant to see major players in the Asia region like CP Foods and Thai Union come into the market. Combine that with Nestle coming in from the outside with their manufacturing in Malaysia, and you're starting to see an ecology develop here around plant-based products. These companies are seeing a future. They don't put resources like this into a marketplace where they don't see a future. As an example, QSR introductions in China, KFC, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell are using Beyond Meat in mainland China. And to look at KFC, they're using chicken nuggets in Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen in particular. And Daiko, let's not forget that the Western QSR chains are only a very small portion of the market, maybe 5% or so. 95% in China is local China restaurants and chains. Significant here that Daiko is using Starfield chicken burger. So the local China restaurant chains are getting into the market as well. If we look at Thailand, in KFC, CPF have got their Meat Zero chicken pops, and that's what this restaurant in the picture is. So again, we're seeing local Asia-based companies get into the market as well as coming in through Western manufacturers and Western chains. But that's not to say that everything is rosy for plant-based products. It's not. Whilst there are many opportunities and we're building an ecology, there's still a lot of things to consider. Patchy brand familiarity. Plant-based products are not extremely well known across all of Asia. There's lots of areas where plant-based products, particularly our version 2.0 plant-based products, not perhaps our traditional mock meats and so on that we see in the region, but certainly the version 2 products that are meant to accurately mimic the sensory profile of meat, they're not well known. And they're often at a price premium, which is obviously not going to drive mass adoption. So that price parity needs to be achieved. We have limited distribution as well. We've got some chains in Asia, some supermarket chains that are going, oh, we're not really sure about all this plant-based stuff. Is there really a market for it? It's not that well established throughout all of Asia. And the taste and the texture, they're not there yet. I was speaking to a major ingredient manufacturer a few weeks ago, and I asked their R&D head, what would you give the best plant-based product that you know what would you give it out of 10? He said 6. I think he was being a little harsh, maybe a 7, but personally the products I've tasted, they are not perfect. They're very good, and they are definitely still selling, even though they're not 100% same as conventional meat products. So the headspace in there to improve means that we're going to look at even deeper market penetration once we get the taste and the texture right, price premium right, distribution, consumer familiarity, all those things that can continue to drive the space. And all of this leads to a little bit of market confusion as to what the products are and what people are supposed to do with them. But that will play out over the coming years as people get that familiarity with the product through trying it at QSRs, through seeing it continually on supermarket shelves. That will drive that familiarity, which will help with the uptake. If we move now to our cell-based meat, and that's another form of alternative protein, but this is meat. It's not mimicking meat. This actually is meat. This is where we take some cells from an animal. It could be a chicken, it could be a cow, a pig, any species you'd like, and then we grow that in large stainless steel fermenters, and we actually grow meat. Now, this is science fact, not science fiction. Good Meat brand by Eat Just, on December the 19th, 2020, was the first sale of legislatively approved cultivated meat at Restaurant 1880 in Singapore. And this is the first time that a product approved by a government food safety body has been commercially sold. There have been some people doing some tastings and labs and so on to produce this product, pilot scale facilities. But this is the first time this was sold. So this now says to the consumer, here's some confidence. This is actually been approved. It's safe. I can eat it. And if you're in Singapore, you can ask Food Panda to deliver any one of 3 products, localized products, using chicken nuggets delivered to your door, and you can actually try cultivated cell-based meat. And just to add to that, yes, it's small scale, but Eat Just have announced that they're going to open a cultivated meat factory in Qatar. So they're expanding in Singapore, but they're also going to put a plant in Qatar. And this is what I say to people in countries with large conventional animal agriculture industries. Hey, if you don't need arable land, you don't need much fresh water, then almost anyone can be a meat producer. So Qatar, if it decides to spend enough money, can simply grow meat as much as it likes. It could become a global power in the export of meat, or certainly provide its own security in regard of meat production. So if countries like Australia, the US and Europe don't look at these technologies, don't explore them and develop them, they risk being left behind and find that their products become uncompetitive in the marketplace. And that can be a vicious cycle. If you can't sell, say, minced products, which will be the first products targeted, well, you either have to drop the products, but then the value you're losing there has to go back onto steak products and other components of the carcass. And even those other components are being attacked by other technologies, which we don't have time to go into now. But the value of the animal is dropping. And if we see price parity in cell-based meats in the next 10, say, years, some people say 5 years, I'm not so sure, but maybe 10 years, and then it becomes cheaper than conventional animal meat, what will happen in the marketplace? Now, you might say, oh, that's really, really unlikely. That doesn't make it impossible. Improbable doesn't mean impossible. And if that does happen, and that is a plausible, possible future, then animal agriculture really needs to say what's going to happen in the next 10 and 20 years. And if we look at cell-based meat companies in Asia, the US and to extent Europe are further ahead of what's happening in Asia, but we're certainly seeing companies in Asia now catch up. In Hong Kong, we have Avant Meats who are doing fish maw and fish fillets. In South Korea, we have Cell Meat doing culture media and meat. Now, the culture medium is the most expensive part of growing cell-based meat. For various reasons, what they call the growth factors and other components are very, very expensive because they've been used in the medical field. Now we need food-grade components. So companies like Cell Meat and other companies in Europe as well are now developing culture media to drive down the cost of cell-based meat. And we have Dana Green who are doing what they call scaffolds. And when you've got the cells, you need to structure those cells so it looks like mince, or even structure it to look like, yes, like a steak, grow a steak. So you need, in some instances, you need scaffolds, and that's what Dana Green is concentrating on. In Singapore, we have Shock Meats, and Shock are doing seafood, and they recently bought Gaia, and so they're now in beef as well. So we're seeing companies in Asia catch up in the startup space. And in mainland China, we have Zhou's Future Food, and they are doing, of course, pork. So what we're seeing here is the seafood side and the pork side, because seafood is a massive market. In Asia, it counts around 40% of all the seafood consumed globally in Asia. And as we saw, that demand for protein is only going to go up. So fish is going to be more in demand as well. And 90% of all fish stocks are currently unsustainably fished. So we are going to literally run out of seafood. And we also know the issues of microplastics in the ocean getting into the seafood. We have concerns over modern slavery in the seafood industry, all sorts of concerns that are driving cell-based and also plant-based seafood products. But like plant-based, cell-based has some challenges. Now, if plant-based products lack some familiarity, well, cell-based are really well behind that. A lot of people have no idea of cell-based, and when they think about it, they think, oh, gee, it's something that just blows their mind. Can we do that? Is it any good? Is it all right? As I said, if they know about what's happening in Singapore, that gives them some comfort that this product is safe, which it is. Also, the regulations are by country. So we need to get regulations in place in any country where it's going to be sold to a consumer. That needs to be put in place. And the only place in the world at the moment that you can legally sell the product legislatively is in Singapore. It looks like Qatar will be next, and hopefully the US will not be far behind in this calendar year. Hopefully we'll see some products on sale there, but regulation is a major challenge. Cost is also a challenge. As I said, the media is a challenge, and huge stainless steel fermenters are not cheap either. And so there's lots of capital expenditure required, as well as the manufacturing costs of cell-based products. And that capital expenditure is required for scale up, even to meet, say, the demand, the increased demand for meat would cost tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars. If cell-based meat turns out to be cheaper, and in decades to come, that wants to replace conventional animal agriculture, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of capital expenditure to actually achieve that. So that, of course, will also take time. Now, the other thing you need, of course, we just talked about, is money. So is there money coming into the area? Well, in 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, in APAC, we had a 6-fold increase in investment in alternative proteins in the middle of a pandemic. And 2021 shows no signs of slowing up. If we look at some of the individual investments, they were across the spectrum. So plant and cell-based, small to large organisations. And in 2021 in February, and it's on here, we had Cellmeat, $4.5 million Series A. In April, we had Joe's Future Food, $2.9 million in angel funds. And in July, it's continuing on. Next Gen Foods in Japan, a $20 million seed round. And as you can see from here, Green Monday, $70 million. Starfield, 3 rounds, totaling $26 million US dollars. So the money is going into the startups and also into some of the more established companies as well, as we can see here. Investments are across the spectrum from seed to Series A. So seeing Series A means that we've gone from a concept and a prototype, a proof of concept, to actually scaling up to supply the market. So there is money around and it is going into the segment. However, if you look at this compared to, say, synthetic biology, or you look at it with fintech or some of the med tech, it's nothing. There's tens of billions going into startups in those areas, but that simply means that this market has a lot of headspace, again, to see major investment in the space. The money is there. And if we look at what some of our VC investors think, well, here's Michael Zhou from Matrix Partners in China, and you can read there. The best part for me is China's market for protein alternatives is absolutely massive. We are witnessing a rapid expansion across the supply chain. The timing is optimal for protein investment in China. So we're going to see a lot more investment in the China market. And here we have David Jung from Green Monday. The near-term growth challenge for the China market is a relative lack of awareness. As we've talked about, people really are not familiar with these version 2.0 plant-based products and certainly not cell-based products. When they do become aware of these products and they see them as an alternative to conventional animal protein to augment their requirement, their desire for more protein, then that is what is going to help drive the market. And if we look at what's happening in China, let's not forget governments. Now, particularly in China, this was at a high-level plenary meeting between the CPPCC and the NPC. And the important thing here is the technology will have strategic importance for the country. As we've seen, look at what the opportunities are. If you don't have enough arable land or fresh water, you can't grow your own products. Now, China is a big pork consumer, and they've had problems with Asian swine fever. So to get away from that and avoid those problems, growing meat locally is a big strategic advantage. And it's obviously been taken seriously at the highest levels. And if we look at Dr. Ding from Joe's Future Food, in the next 5 to 10 years, cultivated meat will get out of the lab and eventually onto the Chinese consumers' frying pan. So we've got both the government looking to lead the way in cell-based meat as a strategic issue, and we have the industry itself saying that they are behind it and they want to make this happen as well. So if we wrap all this up, we've seen the challenge. Look, what are the opportunities? And if we start down the bottom left here, so targeting flexitarian segments, growing familiarity, and growing the trial base. Getting the products out there. People can't buy products if they're not on the shelf. Getting them on the shelf. The next one, sharpen the forms that fit consumptions, occasions, and scenarios. So that's looking at localizing products and making sure they're available across the day parts. They're available for breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, so that the consumer, when they want something, they can get something for whenever they want to eat it. And aligning that with those healthy living and conscious eating trends, particularly those values that we're seeing in Gen Z and millennials, which is what's going to drive this future of alternative proteins. And also, through this VC investment, advancement of plant-based processing, fermentation, and cell-based products. Money needs to go into the research to drive the future of these products through the technology. And the next one, the digital consumer journey. As we know, there's a lot of digital natives in Gen Zs and millennials, and some countries in Asia have a massive digital footprint. So making sure that that's taken into account to drive that familiarity and drive that trial. And if we look at how we get that onto the marketplace and show people what can be done, strategic partnerships with restaurants, chefs, and regional Chinese cuisine in particular, so that people can see what can be done with the product. Because one of the big advantages of releasing a product through a restaurant or a QSR is they cook it the same way every time. So the consumer gets the optimal product on their plate. So then if they buy something and it doesn't quite work, they don't go, oh, the product's no good. They go, gee, I tasted this product and it was okay at the restaurant. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. And they think that maybe they can't quite do it exactly the same way as they maybe treat a conventional meat product. So they're more willing to try and change what they do to match the product. And lastly, there's lots of white space for brands. That lack of familiarity means that there's plenty of space in there for brands to establish themselves and to put their own stamp on the alternative proteins. So overall, a lot of opportunities in the space. So to come full circle, is there a future for alternative proteins in Asia? And I say absolutely yes. And why? Let's summarize. We have a growing population that's going to demand more and more protein. And it is not, frankly, going to be satisfied by simply duplicating more of what we do with the current food system, particularly animal agriculture. We have that growing middle class also driving the growth of protein demand. The current food system is unsustainable. It's just not going to make the grade. There's not enough land or water on the planet to simply duplicate what we do. As twin tyrannies of land and fresh water, we can't just manufacture more of them. So we need technologies which are either going to be more efficient in the use of the products we do have, say with plant-based, and also ones that then don't either use much or any arable land at all and very low fresh water, so about cell-based and other technologies. And I mentioned before with China, the strategic imperative, these technologies that enable countries to produce their own food products is a great strategic and food security issue. Now, to COVID, fortunately, we didn't see major breakdowns in the food supply chain, but we saw some cracks and we saw where there were some problems. And countries realized that, hey, if I don't produce enough product myself, I'm at the mercy of those that do. And so we saw in Europe, countries stopped exporting, only for a short period, only for weeks, but stopped exporting things like soy and sugar and other commodity crops until they saw what was going to happen, whether they were going to need all that product themselves. So COVID's shown some cracks in the food system, and countries are now far more looking to themselves as to how do they supply their population with food, and particularly protein. And then what are the consumer demands? Well, the consumer demands around healthy eating, about sustainability. We know that the healthiest diet is primarily plant-based. Now, yes, some of that may be animal protein as well, but certainly a plant-based basis for the diet is the healthiest diet. And with consumers looking to their health, those consumer demands are going to drive particularly plant-based, and sustainability and so on, and even animal welfare in some countries will drive cell-based. And that is, again, let's not forget, Gen Zs and millennials, 46% of the Asia population, and their values are what's going to drive the future of protein. Health. That is one of their key ones now. We see, I've mentioned animal welfare, but that's not the prime driver for the vast majority of markets in Asia. It is health. So looking to health as a driver with the Gen Zs and millennials is absolutely imperative. And sustainability. So when you add all of these things up and you look at what the alternative proteins can bring to these issues, I think there's most definitely a future for alternative proteins in Asia. I think, though, there's going to be parallel animal agriculture for some time to come, because we can't simply overnight swap from animal agriculture to plant-based or even cell-based. It is going to take at least a decade, in my view, if not decades. And where will it end? No one knows the future. There is a future where animal agriculture is by far and away the minority. There's another possible future where it maintains a large proportion of the marketplace. But companies need to be prepared for both alternatives and define their business such that they have a future no matter what those alternative futures are. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for listening to my presentation. And now we come to our Q&A session. And one of the questions we've got is about, what about the egg industry? When will it be impacted? Well, I think like all portions of the animal agriculture industry, that is definitely going to be impacted. If we look at what's already happening around the world, in India, for instance, we have Evo Foods, who are doing a plant-based egg product. So that's already in the Asia market. If we look further afield, and sorry, that's a plant-based product. So if we look at Nabati Foods in Canada, they're also doing a plant-based egg product. And let's not forget that eggs are not just used for eating, for making scrambled eggs or as a whole ingredient. We also use a lot of egg white proteins as well. And we're seeing those being produced by what they call precision fermentation, where we insert the gene for a particular egg protein into a microorganism like a yeast or a bacteria, and get that to produce the egg white protein. And that's been done by Clara Foods across in the US. They're backed by $6 billion company Ingredion. So those products are likely to come to the market in the very near future and start disrupting some of the egg industry. And the other interesting thing with eggs is that egg whites contain up to 150 different proteins, but some of them are so small, and even though they're really, really interesting with antimicrobial properties and all sorts of things, there's too small an amount to make it economically viable to actually extract that from the whole egg whites. You just thousands of dollars a kilo, not going to happen, or even $1,000 a gram. So now, if you look at our precision fermentation, we can take any protein that we'd like and produce that particular protein. So there could be a really good market for these egg white proteins outside of what you would call at the moment the normal use of those proteins. And just looking at another couple of questions we had previously, which will be larger, plant-based or cell-based meat in Asia? Oh, gee, that's a very interesting question and a very hard question to answer. As we all know, there's no such thing as the Asia market. Asia is a whole range of different markets with different cultures, with different consumers, different demographics. There's all sorts of differences throughout the whole Asia region. So I think it's very much be determined by whereabouts in Asia that we're talking about. Some countries may for cultural reasons, and we've talked about the perceived affluence. When you get more affluent, you can afford more meat, and that shows your affluence. Then maybe that will continue. There might be other countries where the younger generations, Gen Zs and millennials, aren't tied to that definition of affluence for them, and they may decide that, well, no, I want plant-based. And then if you look at a lot of countries which don't have that arable land and don't have that amount of fresh water to grow their own animal proteins, particularly things like Singapore, countries in the Middle East, they may very well go, right, okay, we will invest heavily in cell-based meats. And we saw that approval, as we said, for cell-based in Singapore, and that factory going up in Qatar, where even though they don't have their own large amounts of arable land, fresh water, and ability to graze those animals, that they could very much go, well, okay, this is really going to be a major product that we're going to invest in so that we can then have our own food security and grow meat ourselves. So it's like I said before, no one can tell you the future. There's lots of possible futures, and which one will be bigger? I feel if I had to force to make a decision, I would probably say cell-based, providing it can get to that price parity, because I think there's something about meat. People want to eat meat, whether it's physiological, their body wants meat, or cultural, psychological, whatever it is. People seem to want to eat meat. I'm not sure that plant-based is ever going to be capable of totally replacing animal meat, because people will look at it and go, yes, it looks like it, it tastes a lot like it, but I know it's actually not. It's not meat. It comes from plants. So I think cell-based to me is the real game changer in the whole scenario, but it's going to be very interesting these next 5 to 10 years to see what develops, and see what develops in different parts of the Asia market as well. So I'm sorry I haven't answered the question definitively, but it really is one that's so up in the air at the moment, particularly with cell-based only barely starting to enter the market, that it's really hard to give any sort of prediction there. Another question that we had, which is, will alternative proteins ever be cheaper than conventional meat? Well, I think if we look at the two sides, if we look at plant-based meat, plant-based at the moment, you can be paying 2 to 3 times in some markets the price of a conventional meat burger or even nugget or things like that. And yet companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond in those markets, they're selling everything they can make. So whilst a lot of the conventional animal agriculture say, oh, they're only 1% and nothing, don't worry about it, let's not forget they can sell everything they can make when they're at a price premium. If their volumes grow exponentially, then that'll be 1%, 2%, 4%, 8%, 16%, which is close to where alternative milks are at the moment. And imagine the economies of scale there. So the economies of scale alone are going to drive down the cost, both of the ingredients and the manufacturing. I think we'll see price parity for plant-based products a lot sooner than anyone thinks. We're starting to see pockets of that around the world already. And I think generally we could see that within the next couple of years, say end of 2023, we could see some price parity in there. With cell-based products, I hear some people say 5 years it'll be competitive. I think that's, from the cell-based people, an optimistic view. I'd be leaning more towards 5 or 10 years. But looking at the sheer amount of research and everything that's going into the area, I think that there's a very good chance at reaching price parity. I mean, we're seeing some companies like Nutraco, who are in the conventional animal feeds industry, forming partnerships with people like Mosa Meats, who are making beef, and Blue Nalu, who are making seafood. And if anyone knows how to grow animal cells, it's animal feeds producers. So they're providing scale quantities of the ingredients, the culture media that's the most expensive part of the growing the meat is that culture media and the growth factors. And the bulk of the culture media, we're seeing a lot of companies get into that now. And we're even seeing some companies use algae as a basis for their growth media and replacing some of the growth factors, because none of the cell-based companies want to use fetal bovine serum for two reasons. It's too expensive, and the consumer is simply not going to take the not going to accept the view that we're slaughtering calves to make meat. It's not going to happen. Unless there's actually a third one too. There's not enough FBS in the world to make enough meat to make a dent in the animal agriculture industry. So that will be replaced. It's been replaced by most people already, and will be replaced in all these products when they're up to full commercial scale. So I think the other thing though to keep in mind here that is that price parity is only one component. And that comes to another question we've got, where how is important is taste versus health? Well, if we sort of have a look at the previous question about price parity is one thing, but if it still doesn't taste as good as conventional animal products, then it's not going to get major market penetration. Only a certain amount of people are going to accept, well, it doesn't taste as good as my normal hamburger, but then again, it's plant-based, it suits my diet, it's better for me, I'll eat it anyway. I don't think people will accept that, certainly not for major market penetration. So I think we need to look there at taste parity. And my view on taste parity is it's not far behind price parity, probably 20, 25. If you look at the major flavour and ingredients houses around the world, Givaudan, IFF, McCormick, Griffith Foods, they're all working on plant-based flavours and flavour systems to make sure the plant-based products, they have their flavours optimised. And it's a great market for them. I mean, we're going to need those flavours to mimic, first of all, the conventional meat products. And we also need to look at is, why are conventional meat products the best tasting products that can be manufactured? They are only the best tasting products we know at the moment. Who's to say that by improving or increasing the amount of certain flavour compounds that are a result of cooking conventional meat and putting those into plant-based meat and putting them in increased quantities, that we couldn't get a product that tastes better than conventional meat? I know there's probably a few people out there skeptically looking at that statement and saying, I don't believe it, but who would have thought 3 or 4 years ago we could order some cell-based chicken nuggets from Food Panda in Singapore and have a choice of 3 dishes delivered to your door? So I keep going back to, let's not forget, food is now technology. Technology is exponential. And as my previous keynote today was, it's a exponential future of food. Food is now technology. Technology is exponential. These changes will come quicker than the vast majority of us realise. And when they do, they will make probably a much larger impact than we think. On the health side of things, that really is different across different markets. Now, as I mentioned before, in Asia, health tends to be the driver, far more than, say, animal welfare or maybe sustainability. Certainly that's the sustainability one figures in the Asia markets, but certainly health is the major one. And that could vary by generation as well. We can find that, say, the boomers, the older generations, are far more concerned about fat and cholesterol, and the younger generations are more concerned about the ingredients list, how healthy is this product, do I recognise the ingredients, all those other parameters that we've looked at. So it does vary, and of course you've got some countries which are more highly developed in their food and their food distribution systems as well. So I think that, even though people might be concerned about taste, my contention is still always, if it doesn't taste really good, then people are not going to buy it in large quantities or buy it frequently. They might buy something that tastes not too bad, once, maybe twice a week across the various day parts. But are they going to substitute 3, 4, 5 or more meals per week with plant-based or even cell-based products if they don't taste good? I really don't think so. So I think that is the absolute priority for companies, is to get that taste right. And as we talked about before, localization of the taste. You can't take a product designed in California and sell it in Thailand. You can't even take a product based in Thailand and sell it across China. That's just not going to work. You need to look at localization of the usages and the flavor profiles and make sure that you're producing a product that meets those parameters. And I think just to sort of, to round out the conversation here we're having on the future of alternative meat products, as I finished up with earlier in the presentation, that this is not going to be, I don't believe, a sudden off-the-cliff change. One day we're going to be eating animal meat and using animal agriculture products, and the next that we're suddenly all going to be plant-based. I don't think that's going to happen. Any changes that we see are going to be quite gradual. When you think to build a factory, the factory that's going up in Qatar will take 2 years and several $100 million to construct. And I suggest that's going to be a fairly small plant. You can look at several $1 billion to build a large plant to replace a large conventional abattoir. So we're looking at hundreds of billions of dollars of investment to replace conventional animal agriculture, and that will take a long time. And you can't really retrofit the existing abattoirs because the standards just aren't there that you need to make these cell-based products. And even with the plant-based, you're still going to need a lot more processing capacity. And we are seeing that come on in Canada in particular, where large processing capacity is coming on to make the ingredient proteins for pulses, for things like soy, chickpea, all these sorts of products. They are coming online, but we're going to need a lot more processing, a lot more ingredients to be able to replace animal products. So I think this is going to be quite a gradual change over a period of years, if not, as I said before, over decades. But as always, our companies, we want them to be around for decades to come, not just the next 3, 4 or 5 years. So keeping an eye on these technologies and seeing how fast they are developing, how fast they are becoming competitive, is going to be absolutely essential. So look, thank you very much for your time in watching my presentation. Thank you for your questions in the Q&A. Everybody have a great day, stay safe and keep well. Thank you. There that you need to make these cell-based products, and even with the plant-based, you're still going to need a lot more processing capacity.
Welcome
we are
everyone.
seeing that come on in Canada.
I see the attendees joining slowly. People are entering this webinar.
Make the ingredient proteins for pulses, for things like soy, chickpea, all these sorts of products. They are coming online, but we're going to need a lot more processing, a lot more ingredients to be able to replace animal products. So I think this is going to be quite a gradual